Hello and welcome back to Caffeinated Arcade. This is my DM guide series where we discuss Curse of Strahd, and today we'll be covering Chapter 2, The Lands of Barovia. So the beginning of this chapter gives us a helpful overview of how the lands of Barovia actually function, and also what happens when your players find themselves trapped inside of it. As you know, players, the first thing they're going to do is try to break the system and try to get out of Barovia. So it's helpful to know what happens when they try it. So Barovia is actually its own demiplane, so getting out of it is near impossible because Strahd is the only one who can let people come and go. And the only people that are allowed to come and go are the Vistani, who are servants of Strahd to some capacity. If one of your players does try to leave Barovia, a deadly fog will surround the land and engulf any creature that tries to leave. Now, the crazy thing here is that a creature that starts its turn in the fog must succeed on a DC 20 Constitution saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion. And then D&D 5e, exhaustion's pretty nasty, and the more levels you have, the closer you are to death. So this will give your players some good motivation to maybe stay out of the fog, because even restoration spells won't work while they're in the fog until they get out of it. Another thing to note is that the sun never fully shines in Barovia. Even during the day, the sky is dimmed by fog or storm clouds, or the light is strangely muted. Barovian daylight is bright light, but it's not considered sunlight. And this is important because of a vampire's vulnerability to sunlight. So the interesting thing here is Strahd and his vampires tend to stay indoors, but they venture out at night. But you're not restricted to this exactly because the sunlight in Barovia doesn't affect them. However, they are subject to sunlight created by magic, also known as radiant damage. Damn clerics. So we've already talked about the idea that no one can leave Strahd's domain, and this will also affect your player's spellcasting that they might have access to, because not even a wish spell can allow one to escape from Barovia. Astral projection, teleport, plane shift, and all these spells will simply fail when attempting to leave Barovia. This also applies to magic items and artifacts that have the properties that transport or banish creatures. So the only exception to the rule is the ethereal plane. Players can enter the border ethereal from Strahd's domain, but immediately will be pulled back into Barovia upon leaving the plane. And we'll see this a little bit at the windmill with the hags, because they do have some access to plane shifting to the ethereal plane. The nice thing is that characters who receive their spells from deities will continue to do so, and they can also contact these beings from other planes, and it will function normally. Now, here's the interesting part. Strahd can sense when someone in Barovia is casting a spell and speaking with another deity from another plane. So he can actually choose to make himself the spell's recipient, and he becomes the one who is then contacted. And this is kind of crazy because Strahd is a manipulator, so he can act like someone else's deity and manipulate the party in that way. So that's something interesting to consider as you plan your game. If you have any clerics, paladins, or warlocks, maybe it's actually Strahd who's contacting them this whole time. The module gives some options to alter spells cosmetically, just to make them more creepy and Barovia-ish. I didn't incorporate a whole lot of this in my own game just because I like to give players a chance to describe how their spells work and what it looks like for their characters. It leads to some interesting character development and also flavors things during combat. But there are two I like here, and I definitely incorporate. So Find the Path, this spell is interesting because the alteration is where a child's spirit appears and guides the caster to the desired location. And this is creepy AF, so I really like that one. The other one I like is Telepathic Bond. So characters linked together by this spell can't shake the feeling that something vile is telepathically eavesdropping on them. I really like this one because it further reiterates the idea that Strahd can listen in on conversations, and nothing they do is necessarily safe from him listening in. So that one I like to incorporate as well. There are two main groups to keep track of in the land of Barovia, and we'll start by talking about the Barovians. The Barovians are a primarily human population, and they've been oppressed and mistreated for centuries. So when the party arrives, they will be skeptical and generally mistrusting. They're not going to trust the party right away, especially if there are non human members. They know elves, dwarves, and other races exist, but they haven't seen them, so the party will be treated with a lot of fear and skepticism. Only about 1 in every 10 Barovians have souls. That sounds like the beginning of a commercial or something. Anyway, when a being with a soul dies in Barovia, that soul remains trapped in Strahd's domain until it's reincarnated in a newborn. So Barovians who share the same soul tend to look alike even over generations. And that's why Irina Kolyana, who the players will meet at the beginning of the campaign, looks exactly like Strahd's beloved Tatiana. Both women were born with the same soul. So the soulless and those with souls are physically indistinguishable, but there are some giveaways. So the soulless tend to wear more muted colors, a little bit more gray, and they're pretty depressed and compliant, whereas those with souls tend to have better imaginations and wear clothes with a splash of color. One of my favorite parts DMing Curse of Strahd was actually role playing the bartender in Barovia because he's one of the soulless and he just mindlessly cleans glasses in front of the players and doesn't really answer any of their questions or is any help at all. The next group to talk about are the Vistani, and chances are your players will probably arrive with them at the beginning of the campaign. So the Vistani are wanderers and they travel with horse-drawn carriages they made themselves, and compared to Barovians who are more depressed with gray muted colors, the Vistani are very colorful. They wear bright clothing, they're jovial, and they laugh often. The interesting thing to note, though, is that they serve Strahd, and Strahd is upholding a promise he made to them, and also admires their festive way of life, and he allows them to come and go from Barovia as they please. So, what I would consider with the Vistani, since there are different groups of them, is which groups wholeheartedly serve Strahd and have evil intent within their hearts with that, and also which ones are just in it for being able to travel as they please. So that's something I would think about as you roleplay the Vistani. Another thing about the Vistani is that your players better not piss them off too much. They can utter curses against those who wrong them. When doing this, I would consider the HP of the Vistani who utters it because they will get psychic damage in return. So if it's a simple commoner, they might not utter a curse at all in fear of dying, or at least just a small one. So some of the lists here we have the target is unable to perform a certain kind of act involving fine motor control, such as tying knots, writing, playing an instrument, sewing, or casting spells. So even though this is on the lower tier, it's still pretty big until the curse gets restored by a player. Then at the bigger end of the list, the target gains vulnerability to a damage type of the Vistana's choice. And then the Vistana would take 3d6 damage for that. So the greater the curse, the more damage the Vistani will take for it. Then at the very end of the list, the target is blinded, deafened, or both. When this curse ends, the Vistana takes 5d6 psychic damage. So it's one of those big risk, possibly big reward situations if the Vistani aren't too happy with what the party is doing. The next part of Chapter 2 would be the random encounter tables. Barovia is extremely dangerous, so even if the characters are on a road, an encounter occurs on a roll of 18 or higher on a d20. If the characters are in the wilderness, this ups this chance even further, and an encounter will occur of a roll of 15 or higher. Now, I add one extra layer to this because I'm mean. I say if the characters are traveling at night, an encounter will occur on a roll of 13 or higher on a d20. So the only thing I would be careful of, as with any D&D game, I would be careful not to do too many random encounters because then it will make the players feel like they're never going to reach their destination. So include this with taste, but you want the land of Barovia to feel dangerous, especially when traveling off the beaten path or at night. Now for the areas of Barovia. So the party will start at letter A when entering the land, and they'll enter via the Old Sphalic Road. And the module gives some pretty good descriptions of the road that really add to the horror vibe. So you have black pools of water and also creeping mist. So I'd really encourage you to read those descriptions. And they'll eventually enter through the gates of Barovia, which swing wide for them. And then at letter C, if they're with the Vistani in the wagons, nothing will happen. But if they're traveling on foot for some reason, and those with a high passive wisdom score will notice that there's a dead body off the side of the road. And upon inspecting this body, they'll discover a letter, and it's dated a week ago, and it's from the Burgomaster of Barovia, who it's another plea for help. And if they already have a plea for help, it's going to be differing information, and it should confuse the party and let them know that something's not right, and one of the letters is probably forged. So that will be an interesting encounter. Although they shouldn't stick around too long because if they're there for too long, some dire wolves will come out of the woods and begin sniffing around. Eventually, your party will make it to letter E, which is the village of Barovia. If your party's traveling with the Vistani, though, they'll be pretty dead set on making it to letter G, which is the Tser Pool Encampment, which is where Madame Ava lives, and will give them their card reading. So, what I would encourage based on when I ran the campaign, I would say to give your party some time to explore the village of Barovia, because it's something they won't want to miss, and I didn't want to have too much traveling back and forth between the encampment and the village. So maybe have the Vistani give them like a time period that they're looking to get to the Tser Pool, or maybe just say, hey, you have 24 hours to explore, and then we're taking off with or without you. Maybe something along those lines, just to give the party the idea that it's urgent, but also giving them time to explore the village. So we'll actually go ahead and skip to letter G because a lot of the information on the village of Barovia is actually found in chapter 3. So the Tser Pool Encampment is where Madame Ava lives and will give the party their fortune telling. There are also a bunch of Vistani camps, so if the party is looking for some treasure, they may or may not find it if they're willing to ask the Vistani for it or just steal it, because that's a thing too. If the characters linger by the fire, they'll run into a Vistani who tells them a tale about a wizard who fights against the Devil Strahd, and then encourages them to go inside the tent and meet with Madame Ava. So, going inside the tent, they see her, and she actually speaks the name of each party member and makes some reference to that individual's past deeds. She asks them if they want their fortunes read, and if they agree, then she'll actually give some insight on how they can defeat Strahd and some items that they might find along the way. And you can actually find this in chapter 1. Also, I covered this in my last video, how I ran the fortunes of Ravenloft and just some advice on which locations are better than others. So, Madame Ava is an interesting character because she wants the curse to end on Barovia, and her fate is interwoven with Strahd's, but she will do the vampire's bidding when called upon, and she tries to stay pretty neutral in the conflict. So, if the characters ask for aid beyond the initial fortune reading, she's going to say no. But offers any of the treasures outside. So I would say if your players talk to Madame Ava, especially if one of their fortunes of Ravenloft is here in the camp, she would be fine with them searching the Vistani wagons. But also, sneaking and searching the tents and stealing is an option too, I guess. So there is some treasure here. They can get a variety of electrum, gemstones, cheap jewelry, find jewelry, and also if they roll a 20, they can find one magic item rolled on the magic item table. So a lot of good options here. And that's chapter 2 of my DM guide series for Curse of Strahd. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this video, and next time we'll pick up with chapter 3, the Village of Barovia. See you later!